So hello everybody, this is Sev, aka Bonnier, and today I wanted to make a video about motivation and getting the motivation to work on your projects when it really feels like the most difficult thing in the world to do is to keep going on your project, and sometimes you just feel like giving up. So I'm making this video because I have gotten, not only recently, but for quite a long time now, a lot of people who either lose their motivation to work on their projects or lacking the motivation to start projects. And there's a bunch of different reasons why people go through this, so I wanted to make a video encompassing all of the different ways that this might actually help people. And so I hope that this video is helpful to you all, and without further ado, let me get started. But let me do a quick segue to our sponsor for today's video. This video today is sponsored by me. I make comics! So if you're a fan of character-driven gang dramas such as Tokyo Revengers or Banana Fish, and for those of you who don't mind a theme of a little slow burn romance sprinkled in there, I suggest you read my comic Four Corners. Four Corners is about a hot-headed teenage gang leader named Kazuhiro who teams up with Hideki, a nerdy upperclassman, in order to keep his gang out of danger. If you're looking for a slow burn romance, 90s manga nostalgia, drama, mystery, and a story with a general theme of misfits who band together against dangerous odds to protect others, especially the ones they love, come and check it out. I currently have volume 1 out for sale on my Etsy and also on an Amazon listing. So I recently found the script for this video, which originally was supposed to be a blog post. This was roughly 2 years ago, and when I was writing all of this content for this video, my comic was going through a really big hiatus that lasted roughly a year. In addition to my comic not updating publicly, I also neglected the visual novel that I was working on called Sagebrush, which I'd planned to release for 3 or so years before, and it was kind of in a hiatus all on its own. Needless to say, I am much more motivated. My motivation was at an all-time low back then, and it actually kind of was that way only until recently, maybe as of probably around last year. So back then, my low motivation kind of stemmed from the fact that I was really just not satisfied with where I was with, I would say if you could even say it, a career or lack thereof with comics, and just my creative projects in general, my stories, my visual novels. I didn't make nearly as much money as I wanted to with my comics, and I say all this in past tense because I'm in a way now taking something of a personal vow to change my mindset and hopefully steer myself out of this kind of thought trap when it comes to things like money and success and what I consider success. So to elaborate more on that lack of motivation when it comes to like the lack of my career, or so to speak, I feel as though, and from experience, as time goes on, it actually gets much harder to keep your motivation. For example, I sunk in so much money into my visual novel when it came to music and quite a few other things, and also more money that I had to spend on various other things, and the looming realization that I may not gain back any of that, or let alone profit. When it came to my comics, I felt like I wasn't getting the compensation for all my effort. And then on top of that, I had the physical copies just laying around and just looking at them and just truly feeling like no one was even looking at my work. I'm not gonna lie, a lot of bitterness over the years piled up. I felt like I kept putting stuff out there for free and no one was listening, no one wanted to support, and it really made me feel as though my work was not worth being supported. The problem, as I'm seeing it now, is that I had way too many expectations. I thought that if I put in X amount of work, it was going to guarantee results. And over the years, I've learned the hard way that hard work doesn't really get you what you want all the time. I know this sounds very demotivational right now, but it's actually not. Once I started having less expectations for my projects and instead just simply let them exist as they were, it all felt so much more freeing. Not only that, I stopped having this view of my work as the disenfranchised, the underrated, the not getting the attention it deserves kind of thing. That way of thinking is putting my stuff in a box. Instead, I tried to view it as something worthy of love and attention, which also caused me to be a little more accepting and thankful when it did get attention. It's hard to explain, but I feel like even if it doesn't get the results that I want in the end, I feel as though it is worthy of it, and it is something that matters. And I think that that mindset in general is something that can make all the difference when it comes to your work, the feelings about your work, and how you view success. So recently, after rereading all of this writing for the script that I have, and I've realized just how far I've come since just about 2 years ago in terms of motivation, which has caused me to come up with a few new ideas on how you can hopefully regain the motivation that you have to work on your own projects again, even when making everything feels pointless and you have that nagging voice in your head that's telling you, is making this even worth it? Okay, so first thing, number one, I started to realize that my story was less about me and more about who it could reach. So when I realized the fact that my story could actually benefit people rather than just benefiting myself, I stopped having the fear of any negative feedback simply because the benefits of releasing the project outweighs the cons of not releasing it. So not to be dismissive of criticism, of course, criticism or feedback that you might get on a release project or anything that you might release into the public one day. Not only do I want my work to be the best it could be, but I also don't want it to affect people in a negative way. So it also is a good thing to consider. It's not like you shouldn't consider any kinds of things that might be negative that there may be with your project. But you also need to be good at weighing what works best for your project and not just trying to appease people because you don't want criticism. And I'm not talking about something like grammar or stylistic editing. I'm talking about people who say that there is something in your work offends them. Which, if it's something that's brought up to your attention and you do feel like it's something reasonable that you can change in the editing stage, and not only that, it can be very good to get second opinions because sometimes you do learn things about subjects you might have not known otherwise, and especially if you are getting second opinions from people who have actually gone through those same experiences or have those same perspectives. But I often find that there's so many creators out there who keep themselves from creating or publishing work out of the fear of their work offending people. Where, listen, in my opinion, if you do your research and you're trying your best not to harm anyone, I do feel like it's good that your heart is in the right place. And we do have to understand, though, that everyone's going to have their own perspective. Just don't let it take away from the way you're seeing things. It's kind of the reality of publishing or letting your voice being heard in general. If you can, embrace your voice and work towards being confident with it. And to elaborate more on being confident with your voice, for example, there's a comic artist, Marjan Satrapi, who told her life story in a graphic memoir called Persepolis, which was centered around her life and the experiences of her and her family during the Iranian Revolution in the 70s. As a creator, you would think that someone portraying their own experiences in their life would be a surefire way to offend as little people as possible, because of course, it's a memoir, right? But what a lot of people don't understand is that couldn't be further from the truth. Persepolis does get bad reviews, and not just from people who are simply bored to read it at school, or people who didn't like the art or found reading it boring. There are people in Iran that find her work and her opinions offensive. Persepolis is in fact banned in Iran. There are also people who wouldn't like to hear about her perspective actually dealing with the overthrowing of her country's regime in the late 70s, or her views on religion and politics. And these are sometimes people who have their own experiences either with the country or with a lot of relationships to those subjects. So this is one of those situations where an author really needs to weigh in on their voice. And that's what I mean by really weighing in on your vision versus the opinions of other people. Like I said, you have to understand that other people are just going to have their own perspective. Imagine if Marjan Satrapi thought about what people would have said about her book and how they would be offended by how she portrayed her experiences. If that was the case, then perhaps she would have simply just shut up. And then perhaps Persepolis may have never even been created at all. Either way, I just think that one thing to just continuously keep in mind is that when you lack the motivation, realize that the longer you keep it from the public, the more you are keeping it from other people who could greatly benefit from your story, and that story can really help them in some way and give them the energy for whatever that might be, because it all depends on the values that you put forth in your stories and what you value and what that particular story is trying to say with your voice. Number 2 is everything changed when I started talking to people about my work. So kind of around last year, I ended up making some new friends, and a lot of these people were writers, or they had other kinds of creative projects and everything, and I ended up sort of just opening up and starting to share my work with these people and kind of talking about the stuff that I do. And for the first time, I kind of realized, I was like, I could have been doing this the whole time. Like, I could have been sharing this with other people in my life. And so last year, and kind of in this year too, I'm going forward with continuing to share my work with others. But yeah, especially if you are a really introverted person, the hardest thing sometimes is really to just go up to someone and talk about your work, and it's really hard. I think sometimes you just need to rip the band-aid off, and then you just, in my opinion, because I'm someone who is incredibly introverted, and I kind of just ripped the band-aid off, and then it just got much better for me to talk about it and to kind of connect with other people. And it's really funny because especially after I made that Being a Comic Artist is Lonely video, I ended up rekindling some friendships. I just started talking more to people, and it's been good, I think, for me, and I can just definitely feel things for me changing. And so I just really think that sometimes all it takes is just that one time for you to go through a really anxiety-inducing moment of, hey, I have this thing, do you think you can help me? Can you give me feedback or something like that? Or even doing like feedback trades, stuff like that with other people, other artists. So actually genuinely connecting with other people and doing the really scary thing, which is like, hey, do you mind reading my comic? When you need feedback on it, especially with my friends who do like art and comics. And I realized that my friends who like all of this creative stuff in general, they might actually enjoy the thing that I make. And needless to say, there is definitely a difference between sometimes your friends critiquing your work and like an actual critique circle with more strangers or people that don't necessarily know you, and that's also in and of itself a different thing and a good thing and should be utilized as well, because we all know sometimes our friends will just be more likely to like our stuff more because they know us. So the third thing to keep in mind when you really need to be motivated is you're creating something that's entirely unique. Do you ever realize that when you're creating a comic or a story or any other kind of creative project, you're basically coming up with an entire world, your own entire world, and you're taking that world, the story, the images, and all of the scenes, the characters, and all of the things that they say, you're taking them out of your head and then onto a page or into some sort of medium. But in terms of comics in general, because I know a lot of people who watch my videos do make comics are a unique medium where one person can make all of that happen, and it doesn't really take all that many materials, like with game development, how you need to learn a bunch of software, you need to gather music, you need to gather assets and all of those things, and there's a lot of parts. But with comics, you can just make all of that happen with something as simple as a pencil and paper. If you're making a comic, even if you've got some ways to go, you can just take pride in the fact that you're actually making a world come alive. There's always going to be things that could use improvement, and it's not always going to be fun every day of the grind, but you're making it happen. And isn't it better to have created something rather than to have never done it at all? So the fourth thing is go back to your first source of inspiration. So 2 years ago, when I originally wrote this post, the night before I had this dream that I was looking at all of these early thumbnails and concepts of my comic Four Corners, and all of my sources of inspiration, like the aesthetics, the clothes, the photos, all of the shows that inspired me, the kinds of artwork that if it was an anime, the style that I would have wanted it to be in if it was an animation. They were all displayed to me, and when I woke up, it was like a reminder that had been poured into me. It had been so long since I'd remembered the first spark of why I wanted to make my comic. I wanted Four Corners to be, first and foremost, something I wanted to see and to read. So back in 2014, I had this carefree memory of just sitting on my bed and being hit with this moment of realization, and I had a very clear idea as to what I wanted to make. I pulled out my sketchbook and I started drawing a bunch of character concepts and went with the two I liked the most. For me, retracing back to my memories may be the solution, but I also think a big factor can also be visual. If you don't have early concepts or old art, I think something that might be worth a try is making some sort of inspiration board for your comic, whether that be on Pinterest, a folder on your computer, or an actual physical inspiration board. Try to capture all the things you'd like to just see in your work, and also just things that you really like, things that when you look at them, they remind you of like, this is like where I'd want to be, or this is like how I'd want the artwork to look, or these are the things I want to show up, and just like the aesthetic of what you're trying to go for if you're like really big into aesthetics of how you want your comic to look. So like for an example, here's a Pinterest board I made for my comic that was inspired by this dream that I had. So nowadays I still like contribute to this Pinterest board when I see things that really invoke that feeling of like, oh, this is so four corners, like I'm gonna put that in there. So the next point is look at your story from a different angle. Sometimes it's okay to say what if. What if the characters in your story got hit with a zombie apocalypse? What if your main couple never met in the way that they did? What if your story's main plot conflict never happened, and then what? Of course, this is all hypothetical. You don't actually need to rewrite your whole story. But allowing yourself to steer off the track that you've been setting for your story can help you get to know your characters a lot more. You can figure out what kinds of characteristics are integral to your characters and which traits are actually due to environment or circumstance. So, believe it or not, I have around like 3 or 4 alternate universe ideas for my Four Corners comic, and it's always really fun to work on them. Some of them I never really finish, but I have had so many, and it's like no one asked for this, and I just like made them. I had one where it was like the Four Corners wasn't a gang and it was a band. I had one in the Sengoku period. I had one, which I haven't updated in a while, but it was a novel. It's if Kazuhiro was a manga artist and Hideki was his editor. There's even this new alternate universe I really want to do, which is just like gender swapped Hideki and Kazuhiro, where they're a part of a girl gang. God, I have so many. I can't help it, and I literally cannot stop it, but it really makes things fun for me. One, because it's fun to think about certain aspects, like for example, like if Keiichi never died, almost in all of the alternate universes, Kazuhiro's brother is always alive, and I find that makes such an interesting aspect to the story and how it actually affected Kazuhiro's character. So yeah, I highly suggest you do that, especially, you don't even have to really do anything for it. You can actually just like make artwork for it.
Or maybe you don't have to make anything for it at all. You can simply just daydream about it. Either way, just thinking of the prompt of what if can definitely be the start of thinking about a bunch of different things, and hopefully can be something that can help you get your motivation back.
Okay, so the last thing is just take a break and the universe will find some way to pull you back in. So this one kind of goes without saying, sometimes you just need to take a break. That's kind of why I went on my own hiatus, and to be honest, it's been incredibly beneficial for me. Not only am I able to work on new comic buffers, for instance, I believe I am lining chapter 12. I'm almost done with chapter 12, and I have started thumbnailing chapter 15. And there are only 16 chapters of the comic, so I am more so almost finished with Four Corners than anything else right now. But not only that, taking a break also gives you the ability to detox from the dopamine hit that you tend to get when you see all these notifications and statistics. And platforms have not been helping us out very much. Back in the day, it only used to be maybe web hits, like views on your site or comments. And comments were everything. And comments still are everything. But I find with just platforms in general now, they have everything with notifications, with likes, with subscribers and ratings and all of these things, and I think we tend to get very, very wrapped up in it. And that kind of goes back to the video that I made about making comics as lonely and community, and honestly how I do feel like finding a sense of community really does help with the motivation. And kind of with my first point, how, you know, showing your work to other people, having a genuine connection with other people really helps with the motivation. So another interesting side effect of taking a break is that sometimes you find little opportunities and can pick up pieces of inspiration. I believe this is because you're finally allowing yourself to focus on something other than working hard on drawing and writing. So yeah, like, I highly suggest, and I'm a huge advocate for libraries, not because I work at one, but really because you can find so many interesting things. I've found so many interesting books, things that are just very inspiring, things that you wouldn't have found anywhere else. I forget where this came from. It was this, I don't know if it was The Artist's Way or some book that was talking about going on artist dates or something, like a part of a program where you like take yourself out on a little date, you go out somewhere and you just look for inspiration, you think to yourself. I'm not really sure if that was completely what it talked about, but I know that that is very beneficial. Sometimes you just need to take time to yourself and you just need to spend time with yourself and you need to like kind of regain your energy in a way. So I think I'm going to wrap the video up right now, but I hope all of this was very helpful. I also wanted to thank everybody for watching. I want to thank everybody who is subscribed, and I also wanted to know if there's any other subjects that you would like me to do videos on. There are definitely a lot of things I'd like to do videos on, but the one thing I know for sure I am going to be working towards, it's going to take me a while, it might be a 45 to an hour video, but I want to make a video on how to make a webcomic website using a host and WordPress, because I don't think I've ever seen anyone do that, and I've had a lot of questions about how I make my webcomic website, and I really want to be able to empower other creators on making their own website, and hopefully it should be helpful for people who do other creative projects, and this method can work for people who do web novels. So like, it doesn't have to be a comic, it could even be a web novel website, because when you make the WordPress entry, like when you make the blog entry, you can put pictures or you can put writing in there. So the sky is kind of the limit you'll start to see when you do everything yourself. I highly recommend it. I think that ever since I made my webcomic website, I've just been more happier. It's just been very great. And I recommend other people do the same. So other than that, so yeah, you guys, let me know what you all thought. Were there any other things that you could say that give you motivation? Have you used any of these same methods, or do you recommend other people do other things? Let me know in the comments below, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!